Welcome to this series or the afternoon clinics that I have started conducting recently, where it's not a webinar, it's more like sharing the findings that I have actually managed to glean from the clients that I have worked with, so that you can take it and apply it in your work scenario, or you can use it and tweak it, and people have done that. So happy to be of any help if you need more information, insight. My contact details will be shared later, so that's not an issue. Now, I know that there's no dearth of content. If you Google on any topic, you get so much of information these days. And to compound that, we have AI, which actually adds a much more interesting flavor to the knowledge that we can actually obtain. It's all about asking intelligent questions and then getting answers. So what I want to do is I want to focus on something which is more practical. AI can hallucinate, so it can say you can do this or whatever. So my intention is to keep it short and sweet and then take it from there. So I'm going to be running the session only for 20 minutes, and if you've got any questions, let's continue with that and then take it from there. And this is how the today's session is going to roll out. So it's basically I'm going to set the scene, then dive into a bit of engagement, what employee engagement is all about, how companies have used it, and what are the current challenges and how can we apply it in our current context. So let me start with the scene. This I did earlier for people who attended last week. They actually know about it. So apologies for repeating it. Just to set a context, in a business, be it hospitality or any business, you need to actually have a strategy. It could be a one-man band, which means you need still have to have a strategy. And to execute that strategy, we need employees. And we say employees, it could be you or it could be a team of people that work for you. Now, having a great strategy is brilliant, and having employees is also fantastic. But if you don't have customers, then nothing exists. The business does not exist. So what we have done, we have been focusing on, and I've been doing this for almost 20 odd years, 25 years to be precise, and some where we have actually looked at and helped various organizations in the hospitality and retail and various places. I looked at all the things that they do, and we focus on these three things where we've seen how things help them to become better version of themselves. So what we have done is we've looked at what are the things that are important. So we look at the first thing, which basically the intersection between where customers and employees happen, which is what we call as the delivery. Delivery is where your products, services, processes, everything come into play and its effectiveness kicks in. The second bit is where the intersection happens between employees and strategy. We call that as the engagement piece. This is where we talk about employee engagement, talent management, your recruitment practices, your reward recognition strategies, and per person, what have you. Why should employees believe in what you are asking them to do? How do you ensure that it happens? All that comes here. The third area of focus is where customers and strategy intersect. And this is where alignment happens, because you can't build a product and hope people will come. You can't actually, you know, imagine things. So you need to be aligned with what your market wants to understand their current and future needs and offer your products and services to meet that need. So we look at this. But the core of all this, where you look at the number four, is where leadership exists. So we have seen companies that actually leverage these four things to get the best out of people, best out of customers, and they become very profitable and become best places to work for. Now, people who know me know that I'm a sucker for acronyms. So I actually created an acronym, which is basically you want to change the way you work, you need to deal with it. And the deal basically is what I spoke about: delivery, engagement, alignment, and leadership. So when we talk about all this, the core of all of this is leadership. So we start with the leadership. Now, how do they lead? Leaders have a very clear purpose. And we spoke about this last week. We spoke about how companies have created purpose, how they've actually used that to help employees understand the value they add through their role, and how that has improved performance and productivity and added a significant contribution to the bottom line. We spoke about this last week. And if you've not listened to the presentation of the clinic, please go back and look at it, where we talk about some practical examples as to how it was done. Now, a great leader is always obsessed with growth, but then they are focused on getting exceptional and amazing customer experiences. We'll be talking about customer experience next week, but then for that to happen, they are obsessive and they are really passionate about bringing the best out of people. Now, when we talk of talent or when we talk of employees, a lot of people talk about employees that are an asset. Now, it's become a very cynical statement these days because, as an asset, if it's an asset, normally we should invest in the asset to appreciate it. But what do we do? As leaders, most of them try and depreciate the asset. So when there is some, economic storm that is brewing over the horizon, first thing that gets cut is your training budget. The second thing that gets cut is your people. So if we really value people, are we doing the right thing? That's the question that we need to think about. But wherever we have seen amazing performance come or people perform exceptionally, leaders have been passionate about their people and invest in them a lot. That then is followed by operational excellence. So you can't have amazing people with no processes. So they are obsessed about that. And finally, the leaders are actually bold. They take action, they take calculated risks, they actually study and they do a lot of things. So what we will be doing is we'll be looking at all these aspects every week. So this week, we're going to be looking at employees. So employees. So let me start by looking at productivity and performance. Now, if you look at productivity and performance, till the age of mechanization, no one was really bothered. When automation kicked in, like likes of Ford started manufacturing in bulk, and when you had automation coming in, then productivity and performance became an important thing. Again, we use productivity and performance very loosely, but let's stick with that. I'm not going to have a debate on that. So when you talk about improving productivity or enhancing performance, the first thing that happened in the field of management was the time and motion study. When they did the time and motion study, what they did was look at the behavior. And they said, okay, this is what people are doing. And by giving them tasks and using the data, they were able to impact productivity and performance going forward. Now, what we came to know later is people's productivity improved not because of things that they were asked to do. It's just because they were observed. That was the core that was driving people to become more productive and perform exceptionally well. But then it hit a ceiling. There was a limitation on which it could actually not maximize beyond that. So again, the field of HR did not have anything much to offer at this point in time. So the attention of businesses shifted towards your TQM, your CQS, your Kaizens, your EFQM, all those things which focused on process effectiveness. It actually made the processes super efficient, reducing waste, learning from your mistakes, learning and development as a result of improving processes. All those things happened, and things started moving in the right direction with respect to performance and productivity. Unfortunately, the behavioral science was not as evolved as the focus that was put on your processes. Now, fast forward a few decades in the 70s and 80s, you started getting things about knowing about the psychometrics. They started gaining dominance. So people now had another way of looking at behavior beyond processes. Now, that's fine. But what happened is basically psychometrics just give you it's just qualitative data. And it does not really help you get to the nub of the problem. Yeah, you can do things with it, but again, it has limitations. You need to have an expert behind you always to tell you how to interpret the data and so on and so forth. So from a commercial point of view, that was not practical to actually have an expert always to interpret the psychometric data. Now, the big breakthrough for us came in engagement, and that's where we have been talking about. This is the first time where HR got a number to actually show the impact of what is happening in the organization, be it relationships, be it communication, or whatever. So engagement became the gold standard. Now, it is, don't get me wrong, engagement has done its job and it has, helped companies improve performance. But what really is happening is engagement is not actually impacting performance as much as it should. The reason being, engagement is the result of what you think, or you decide, you think, make a decision that I want to be engaged, that then manifests as behavior. So you do the right thing, which then impacts performance and productivity. But we all know, and people who have read Daniel Kahneman's book, Think Slow, Act Fast. I might get this title wrong, but I mean, it's the danger if you do it the other way. He talks about two levels of thinking, which is system one and system two, which is one is autopilot, which is the conscious and the subconscious thinking. Subconscious drives your actions, whether you want it or not, which is what we call as the feeling or the experience. How you feel impacts how you think. How you think impacts how you behave. How you behave then impacts your productivity and performance. So we have started talking about employee experience. Funnily, customer experience has been around for quite some time. We've been talking about employee engagement, but not about employee experience until the recent past. Now, a feeling is nothing but an emotion. And what do you mean by that? It is energy in motion. So if you are angry, what happens? You actually, your fists clench, your heart rate goes up. There's a message that goes to your brain, and it then starts sending some chemicals, which then creates certain actions. So it is an energy that is moving to create a series of actions. So feeling then impacts thought. Now, a practical example, we all know that chocolates are bad for us, but we don't think about stopping to eat the chocolate till we actually bite it. So when we look at a bar of chocolate, at least me, I just go and dive into the cookie jar or the chocolate box, bite it, and I think, oh, I should not be doing this. So your feeling is always winning. And what happens is, if you go by the scientific philosophy behind all this, you have the conscious, which is your engagement, what do you think? You have the feeling, which is your subconscious. But then you also have something called the preconscious, which is basically your core values and core animal instinct that drives all this. We'll talk about this a bit later. But feeling, by understanding how people feel, you can then change the whole dynamics of performance and productivity. And that is influenced by our values. Now, value, when I say values, I define it very loosely. It could be the culture at work, or it could be the values that we as human beings have. Now, the culture at work is actually impacted by how you feel about work. Because if you don't have a great team, you have actually conflict with your team, or if you've got a conflict with your manager, or there is an interdepartment conflict, a toxic culture makes you feel unloved, it's stressed, and so on and so forth, which impacts the performance. But what we have seen is we cannot wear masks. So we actually have our life and work coming together. So our life challenges impact how we feel, which then impact our performance. And thanks to COVID or post-COVID, companies have started supporting people on life challenges because we worry about mental health, physical health, relationships, money. We even worry about work, outside work. So the support that the company is providing is actually helping people move in the right direction. Now, all this is fine, and I've given you the theory. Before I jump into a bit more of what we did with clients, I just want you to look at what's happening in an organization. In an organization, I have two things that work. One is what I call as the humanics, which is anything to do with people, and the second one is mechanics, which is the processes and systems in place. There is always a constant tension between humanics and mechanics. In some places, where things work well, both humanics and mechanics work in tandem. And you have challenges when it comes to relationships, humanics fail. When it comes to delivery, sometimes it could be the process that fails, or it could be both process and people. just bear this in mind because I want to start talking about fear. My research was about understanding how do you value people consciously and subconsciously, where we started looking at why do you do things. And at the very, very core, fear was the driving factor. Now, if it is fear, I can't just go and say that's what drives and we need to address that. We need to come up with a solution. So one of the things that alleviates the fear is trust. Now, trust in is easy to get when it is just a process. But when it comes to people, there's also an element of empathy. So trust, empathy, and fear have a relationship which, when managed effectively, enhances how you feel, which then manifests as loyalty. So you have behaviors that trigger loyalty, behaviors that trigger commitment, behaviors that trigger satisfaction. So by understanding and building trust and empathy, companies can then start looking at what is it that they can do to get their employees to think about their company's product or service as the first choice. What can they do to ensure that the companies are committed? So, what can you do? Influence them from a feeling perspective and a thought perspective. Similarly, from a satisfaction perspective. This is the theory that we used to make the change. So, we focused on this. Now, what did we do? We started with a hospitality chain. This is basically a chain where they had issues with employee engagement. The scores were high, employee engagement scores were significant, but in reality, that was not in line with what was happening on the ground. So, by understanding what was really happening, we had to go a bit deeper. So, what we did was we said, let's start from the top. What are we going to do, and how are people feeling? And managers were actually trained to listen to their colleagues empathetically. And the chief exec asked his team to talk about how they felt about his style of leadership, what is the challenges, and so on and so forth. This was rolled out. And what did they do was they asked questions, very simple questions around trust. Am I empathetic? Do you trust what I say? How do you feel as a result? What can we do differently? So this was a conversation that was carried out on a regular basis. When we started talking, we talked about being bold. They decided to be bold and they decided to have conversations face to face with their team members. And we were able to achieve this because it was rolled from the top. So people at the bottom started seeing what their managers' behavior was and how it changed as a result of the process. And it built a lot of confidence. But we've had some other clients, in fact, a chain of restaurants where they didn't want to do this, but they still asked those questions and then used the data to come up with something which was much more practical. So from that, what they did was they said, okay, what can we do to change the physical elements, which is the mechanic side of things, for you to enhance your experience? What can we do from a technical point of view to train you if you feel underqualified, or what can we do to address this? And then from an emotional point of view, what can we do to support you? So that is how they broke it down. And they started measuring it in a very systematic way. And we helped them put together a simple but effective measure using only 6 questions, 5 questions around trust, empathy, and all that stuff, and an open-ended question, which basically I was asking, how can you change, or what are the things that they would love to change? Then this is where real change happened. They just didn't do it. They then built it as part of their manager's KPI. They said, this is what it's going to happen. And they connected it with the customer experience scores. So if you're working within a department, your department has got customers, which is basically other colleagues from other departments. So how they felt interacting with you was measured. So they started tracking it. So if you're saving the front end customers, their customer experience scores were tracked and connected and compared to how the employees felt and how it's impacting performance on a regular basis. And to cut a long story short, this is what we managed to achieve. We actually looked at 3 key pillars. One is basically creating a community. We looked at how can we create a community. So we used the purpose statement to bring the team together. But then we had other things like, ideas have been, things like that. I'm not going to go through it. We created a culture club and we created a culture clown who basically would go and, uh, you know, pull people and say, hey, you're not living by the values. For each property, each restaurant, we did that. Now, from a communication point of view, all the managers or the senior managers were invited to actually be part of a talk show, which we organized. But I mean, you could organize it on your own. So people could dial in, ask any questions and about anything that they were worried. So it broke down the barriers of communication. Jargon busters, employees were actually given tasks to convert, especially in hospitality and financial services. So much of jargon. So employees were given the task to use common English to rewrite documents, to rewrite any SOPs and so on and so forth, so that new recruits could understand what it meant. Customers' feedback was actually, in fact, one insurance client actually took customers' insurance documentation, and converted it into plain English. Then the third bit was on around compassion. How do you demonstrate empathy? And then employees came up with various ideas on how to reward empathy. So they used to vote for the most empathetic person in the team or in the property, and they all used to get recognized, either a day off or whatever. Again, the rewards were agreed by the employees rather than the management saying this is what we're going to offer. And some employees even traded holidays as a result of this, which is amazing. The story is amazing. And what happened as a result? Engagement went up, profitability went up, attrition went down, and it's a great place to work. It's one of the great places to work, and there are various properties that have actually done that. Now, from that, what are the key takeaways that we have? We have very clearly seen that managers have a direct impact on engagement and profitability. I'm not going to go through these numbers, but you can read it for yourself. Focus on engagement, but engagement is not the be all end all. To get people engaged, you need to start looking at how people feel. And we also know that if people are disengaged, you're going to actually have high levels of attrition, high levels of absenteeism, and so on and so forth. So, what we have seen, that is working across sectors in retail and hospitality, positive employee experience boosts performance. And we've seen this time and again where people feel great about their colleagues, the manager, the team, the department. Attrition rates are low, they go the extra mile. And we've seen performance go through the roof. And we've compared it against the CX scores of the properties or of the stores. And you can see the visual impact directly. So, what can we take away from this? It's easy to personalize the support you offer by asking some key questions. You can start focusing on experience and making them start with small steps. That's something that we see works. Of late, people are talking about well-being. Just move away from well-being. It's just one aspect of it. How do you bring a sustainable you to the equation? How can we actually build an individual who is resilient at work and outside work? What is the support that you can provide? And how can you do it? By building a community of people who can actually offer that together. So that's something that you need to look at. And technology. I mean, when we started doing all this, we did not have AI or anything 15 years back. But these days, the amount of insight you get is phenomenal. In fact, we are analyzing something as a project for a client where we are analyzing the documentation and the internal communication that happens and predicting how people are feeling and then linking it back to their experience score. So sky is the limit if you actually open your eyes and start looking at it. Now, we all know that it is easy to start and do a lot of things. But what I fundamentally seen is it all starts by having a clear strategy and then ensuring everything falls in place. So if you are keen to try something out, we've got a free evaluation, which we call as business evaluation questionnaire. Please feel free to complete it and it will generate a report. Then you can see what is happening in your organization with your teams, with your customers. We've taken the questions that we used earlier simplified it and added a few more questions. So you will get a report and you can actually use it. And if you need more help or more insight, please feel free to reach out to us. And the next week, what we're going to talk about is customer experience. And I did shoot a bit more. Apologies. Any questions?